Kristina Trastek, the Director of Performance Management at the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. Today, we're going to be discussing contract monitoring. So a little about us first before we jump in. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in social work with a background in child welfare, serving children and families at the local, state, and national levels. I also have a background in data analytics and, of course, performance management. My bureau, the Bureau of Performance Management, is small but mighty. A little about what we do. So we are independent monitors in a child welfare settlement agreement that resulted from a federal lawsuit in 1993 brought against the state of Wisconsin and Milwaukee County. And we've been independent monitors since the early 2000s. My team also manages our continuous improvement program at the department, where we support, promote, and strive to embed continuous improvement culture throughout our department. And lastly, we're responsible for the department's performance management program, which now includes managing our contract administration program.
And I'm Disa Patel. I'm a research analyst in Kristina's bureau. My background is in evaluation. I love it. I started in public health doing evaluations for federal grants, those in tobacco, along with climate and health program. Been with DCF for about a year and a half, and my focus has been on performance management, specifically through the lens of contract administration. I'm always working on bringing performance metrics into managing contracts as a way to promote evaluation at the state level. Because if we can't improve what we don't measure, so let's measure things that matter.
Great. So we're really excited for this opportunity to share with you our experience and our journey in developing Wisconsin DCF's contract administration program. So here's what we're going to go through today. We're first going to briefly give you some contextual background about our agency, and then we're going to walk through our journey from becoming involved with contract administration, gaining understanding and helping others understand the connections between contracts and performance management, and lastly, our effort to shift the culture in our organization. Disa loves spoilers, so I included one here. The title of the presentation asks, "Is that my job?" And so what I'm going to tell you today, and what I tell my team and leaders and anyone else who will listen, it is all of our jobs. So let's jump in and find out why. So a little background about DCF. The department was created in 2008. It took programs from our Department of Health Services and Workforce Development and pulled out those programs that the focus was on kids and families. This was an attempt to break down those ever pesky silos that we find in government. So in a little more detail, there are primary programs that we administer. The first is child care. Within child care, we're responsible for the regulation of child care centers. We manage child care subsidy programs and promote all efforts to ensure children in Wisconsin have access to high quality child care. In regards to child welfare, we oversee statewide child welfare and community-based youth justice programs. Our child support program is responsible for overseeing the administration of the program across the state. And then work programs is responsible for overseeing a number of job programs as well as refugee services. And then I saved the best business area for last, management services. Houses IT, finance, regional operations, and why it's the best. Well, of course, it houses our bureau, so we're partial to the business area. But ultimately, our goal of our division is to support and provide tools, services, and just provide other functions to effectively and efficiently execute our department's missions and support these programs I just walked through. So a little more about our business model. So we are a pass-through agency. So most of the programs we're responsible for, we receive state and federal funding and are therefore state-run, county-administered. So many of you know what this means, but I will say, speaking for myself, when I first started working in the system, I didn't fully understand what that meant. So an example, the federal government gives each state federal $4 to administer child welfare services. So we get that funding, and then majority of states actually just administer the program themselves. So they may have regional hubs to help to execute those child welfare services across the state. In about a dozen or so states like Wisconsin, we actually contract with our counties to provide those child welfare services. So within our department, we have county and state contracts for not just child welfare, but also child support and child care, amongst other smaller programs, but those are the primary. So with that said, we have a lot of contracts. Between $800 million and $1 billion a year, which is between about just over a half of our budget goes out in contracts annually. We have over 1,000 contracts a year and approximately 75 to 100 different individuals administering these contracts. So again, just some background information of that'll help you put some context to our discussion today. So let's jump in now to our performance management journey. So our first stop, and I think a lot has been discussed, so we won't go into too much detail about STAT programs, but at DCF, our first stop in our performance management journey was KidStat. So when the department was created, and for about 10 years, so from 2009 to 2019, KidStat was a living, breathing thing at our department. It helped us, of course, track, analyze, improve outcomes within each of our divisions. The focus was really on our major programmatic outcomes and was not tied specifically to any of our budgetary or spend decisions. The way in which we were executing KidStat, it required that leadership devote a significant amount of time, starting from about 50 meetings a year, ended up to about 20 annually, and then in addition, another 20 to 50 briefings. And this is our highest level executives. So it took a lot of time. Likely because of this intensive time commitment, the sometimes adversarial or confrontational nature of the meetings, and really our inability to focus on the actual strategies or lack thereof, KidStat became more of a burden than a management tool. Eventually, it evolved into a quarterly informational meeting rather than that management tool, unfortunately. So our journey got difficult. Reminder, we're from Wisconsin. So when I say we kind of, KidStat hit a wall of cows maybe. But we spent a lot of time as we had a new administration come in 2019. We spent a lot of time briefing, rebriefing the new appointees about the importance of KidStat, importance of measurement, evaluation, data, and outcome. But we didn't gain the momentum or buy-in to continue that KidStat program because it wasn't valued throughout the organization. So that was tough because my team's original job back in 2009 when the department was created was to run KidStat. That was our bread and butter. It was our job to ensure that there were meaningful metrics, assist in evaluation, really support leadership, and ultimately help hold our programs accountable. So to lose that momentum and buy-in without additional direction was rather unnerving. And so this is all happening pre-COVID. So as many of like you out in the audience, when things would get stressful or unnerving, as I mentioned, one thing that I would do, as you probably all do as well, is find a peer to talk through your struggles. So in this case, I found myself in our CFO's office talking through my struggles. Little did I know that conversation was going to change my journey in leading performance management for our department, but also my team's role in supporting our program divisions and ultimately, hopefully, how we do business at DCF. So in talking with our CFO about my concern of KidStat losing momentum, I shared that I was concerned that there were limited ways in not having KidStat to capitalize and use data to make sure that we're making good investments and to make sure that ultimately we have positive outcomes for kids and families in Wisconsin. So our CFO, with world of encouragement, positive vibes, lots of excitement, was like, interesting, you should bring that up. She went on to discuss her struggles to find a partner to improve the contract administration efforts across the department, and that my team would be a perfect fit. So again, coming in as my bread and butter is KidStat, she explained my predecessor wasn't interested. It seems to fit with the team. With the fall of KidStat, this might be an opportunity. And I told her that I didn't totally understand it. What she was talking about findings, federal rules, regulations, a bunch of financial terms. I, to this day, like try to pretend that I know what she's saying. So, with that said, struggle to make some connections with what she was talking about. But after a couple of these venting sessions, maybe over a beer after work, it really did start to click for me. And I realized I needed to shift my thinking from focusing on these large programmatic outcomes and rather focus on contracts or strategies that, if successful, would help us achieve our programmatic outcomes. So I said yes and said I wasn't sure how this was going to end up or how my team was going to react, but it seems like a good fit and it seems like an important thing that we needed to be doing. So I continued to think about this destination, these roads that we were going to take. And so I tried to really think about the two potential paths in front of us. Focusing on contract administration, like KidStat, is and can be data driven. And although our current contract administration program is really more of a checklist around compliance and very financial focused, it did provide an opportunity to ensure accountability directly related to our spend that hadn't been there before. And it was also an opportunity to promote evaluation and continuous improvement, which of course my team really, that's what drives them and keeps them coming to work every day. So I had to ask myself, can the road of contract administration take us to the same destination we were trying to reach with KidStat? Is it a good investment of my team's time? So I continued to do some thinking, because this was, again, is a really big shift, and we know change management is important when we're making shifts like that. But I did come to some important conclusions that I think other folks, it took some time for them to come to as well. But first and foremost, staff and leadership were bought in. It may not have seemed that way, but they're already dedicating time and resources, maybe not the time and resources that they should be, that demonstrated the level of importance of contract administration. But in comparison to KidStat, they were already providing those times and resources. Also, I found with KidStat that we were focusing on the numbers of our end outcomes. We would come into these meetings every month, every quarter, and say, we're at 98.7. Now we're at 97.6. And it really wasn't on the strategies. We saw minimal movement. It was kind of the same discussions, because we were focusing so far on program outcomes and in those impacts. Where with contract administration, we again had an opportunity to force staff and managers to focus on strategies and activities that would impact those end outcomes. We tried to do this in KidStat, but again, everybody was still very focused on those program outcomes. Okay, so I'm going to keep plugging Wisconsin. It's just fun sometimes. So when someone hands you a cow, make some cheese if it's the right cow. So here, in all reality, right, here's a big picture of cheese, delicious cheese. Hopefully folks like it. But if you look at a cow, her milk, all these things, like all of it separate, maybe you don't really see this beautiful array of cheese, right? You see like what you would think is a dairy farm. But I realized, right, this is what I need to do. I need to take the pieces. I needed to get where like the cheese is made, get those ingredients, and really think about, how do I pull all of this together? I know that I had the theory of change in at least the minds of the contract administrators. The activities were already happening. We knew our end outcomes, but how we pull it together. So back to the spoiler. my job, right? So this is contract monitoring. Is that my job? Yes, it is. It's my job. But my job was to help pull those pieces together and get people thinking in that mindset. So with that, my next hurdle in this journey was to have my team also buy in that this was their job. So I've got my staff a lot of cheese. We threw a party, drank some beer, and I said, hey, I've got this idea for you. So no, really, I knew that it wasn't going to be an easy change, an easy shift, but I also knew that I have just an amazing staff that would, even if hesitant, a bit unsure, would take that journey with me if it meant that they were ultimately having a positive impact on the kids and families that we serve. So first, I had to acknowledge that this was a big shift in our roles. We had always done KidStat, so to take the focus away from that wasn't a small decision. Second, I had to help them make the connections that I did. So I know I spent a lot of time talking about the connections, but again, it's important. And I walked through that journey with them as well. I had to convince them that it is in our wheelhouse. It is still promoting performance management and accountability. Third, I had the team approach this as a continuous improvement project. My team is driven by creating efficiencies and having an impact in supporting the programs we serve. This was a program ripe for improvement. And lastly, I knew that we had research and evaluation staff who, as Disa can attest, love evaluation. So I needed to create space and encourage our team to view this as an opportunity to promote evaluation to our program staff, even if not immediately, that in the long term that we would get there.
So we may have been hesitant and unsure, but we were doers and we had to begin somewhere. So we started and found out that it was not the road we expected. We may not have known fully what to expect. Contracts and managing contracts, huge learning curve, right? All the financial procurements, your contracts. Are we doing a fiscal year, a calendar year? What does that even mean? Why are there so many years when time means nothing anymore? So there was a lot of potholes. We didn't know really where to go. So we had to first take a step back and look at what we had. So we first looked at where we could grow. There wasn't a lot of program support, or at least as Kristina was mentioning, it was not the resources being provided for that support to really show that dedication. It was that added on task. It was an administrative duty, not something that truly matters. So while there was acknowledgement that it was important, it was just not getting followed through in the way that it really needed to be, in part because there wasn't that dedicated program staff or contract administrators. Again, just that add-on task, the compliance task for it. And as we looked, we saw a lot of inconsistent processes. The policy was confusing and there's a lack of training. So how were we going to support change to focus on contract administration when people weren't fully bought in and everything was confusing? So we need to look at our strengths. So while we may not have all the dedicated resources, we did have that executive support and buy-in. We also have a very strong contract team. And so the contract team to us are people who support those contracts. So it's the contract administrators, but it's also everyone else at DCF that help get it through the system. So it's from budget to procurement to accounting to grants to performance analysts. We have a lot of smart people who actually understand those kind of confusing, inconsistent processes or what it should be. And then while I may be a pessimist, the growing infrastructure was a strength, right? We're growing, we're able to adapt, be flexible, and really adjust so that as we're growing, we're not just getting money out the door, but we're wanting to focus these on contract outcomes. And then, of course, as Kristina said, we're mighty. We're pretty strong, even though we're kind of small in our division. So actually, I did none of that, though. I started about 1.5 years ago. I landed my dream job in evaluation. I was going to be doing this qualitative work at a state agency to ensure that our programs aren't just accountable, but are improving the lives of children and families. And I show up and was just a little confused and was like, Kristina, I don't fully get it. I was going to be doing this evaluation. Why are we focusing so much on contracts?
And I said, just do it. It's your job. No, not really. really though, so what I said to her was, well, back in 2017, we were found in non-compliance by our state legislative audit bureau. And also we had a finding from our federal partners at HHS OIG. And so that's right. That's why we had to do something here. Also, into a little more detail, we didn't monitor close enough, right? So we didn't monitor our subrecipients' expenditures closely. It resulted in some unallowable claims being made. We had to pay that back. Also, we didn't document that we had been monitoring our contracts. Like I said, we have a lot of contracts and we didn't have a consistent way of monitoring. So when asked for documentation and we couldn't provide it, it was found that we had no proof of our monitoring, which is a problem. So Disa, that's why we're doing this.
Cool. It doesn't really answer anything though. So I get this connection, right, that we had contracts and there was a process to be fixed. So I was very bought into this continuous improvement. Let's fix this process. But I just can help make the process better, but I don't really see that as evaluation.
Oh, why did we hire you? No, really. Okay. So that's a really good point. So I maybe didn't tell you exactly why we're doing this. There was some problems, and so there's a focus, but why we're doing this. Okay. It is because the success of our contracts are directly tied to the success of our programs. Contracts are our programs in action. If we don't take the time to evaluate the outcomes of our contracts and the money associated with those contracts, how do we ever expect to improve the lives and kids of the families that we are tasked with serving?
Kristina said that to me about like 5,000 times. Needed it to get restuck all the time. And so really are like creating my dream job now. And the one thing that really sticks out is that contracts are programs in action. So if there are programs, we can do evaluation. But before we can really start to leverage the contracts, identify those areas of improvement, work on those strategies that can help those end outcomes, we needed to fix those potholes. We needed to fix those things that are getting in people's ways, because people aren't going to look at the bigger picture if there's huge problems, immediate problems in front of them. And so the first thing was we had to clarify the guidance that was being provided. Policies can be a drag for some people, but really a well-written policy helps to communicate those expectations, the responsibilities, and provides that accountability to make sure things are done. So as she said, one of the main things was that federal finding, and we realized we needed to make sure we knew who was making this subrecipient determination. You know, these have specific monitoring requirements. We wanted to make sure we were clearly identifying that as we moved on. And while we may have up to 100 people like as contract administrators, we then have this contract team. So we got over 100 staff working on contracts and all of these roles and responsibilities. And it wasn't really clear who was doing what all the time. And so we actually created a policy, and it's a really, fantastic policy for what policies are, right? We have roles we walk through from contract development to implementation, who's doing what and what these roles are. So not only does it help delineate who does what, but helps new contract administrators know what they're responsible for. And even though, subrecipient was a reason for one of our findings, all contracts deserve or require, good monitoring. So we, also want to have this fiscal performance monitoring requirements. And we created trainings to share all of this information. And, once a good way to get people to take trainings is you make a policy that they need to take these trainings. And then lastly, one of our other big findings was we didn't document what we monitored. So, sorry. And so in order to get to what we wanted to monitor, one of those things was with the administrative data. So we already were kind of gathering that data, but it was online, publicly available, but we never showed that we looked at it. And so needed to have a policy that really clearly showed, we looked at it, oh, they weren't meeting it, here's the activities we did, or they were meeting it, and things are looking good, but we actually looked and reviewed it. So as we began, we knew we needed to help share all these new revised policies with those involved, because you can't actually just say there's a policy and expect people to do what you want them to do. So we held workshops back when, we did in-person things, back when we worked together in the same building, really helped to build those, relationships across the department as well. And it really kicked off this change to share that, why are we doing this? Well, we made a mistake and it cost us, but also why monitoring contracts matters. And it's their business model. And for some, myself included business, I don't like being in government, but it's really how we serve the state. And so if we get money to serve the state and we don't look at where that money is going or how it's used, it's not a service and it's the public that's impacted, not really my day-to-day. And so I think that really matters. And we knew, even, before everything being virtual, we wanted that, easily accessible virtual training. And so began creating these trainings that people could take and retake if they wanted to, kind of short, they're like 10 to 15 minutes, and really started with 1 to 3 trainings talking about, why do contracts matter? What are people's responsibilities? And where do you go to for help? And right now we have 10 trainings, a whole curriculum, and it's just over 2 hours that really helps people walk through what they need. We have other resources like a glossary because no one knows what fiscal year is or which fiscal year you're talking about. But we've also done newsletters and webinars, and these have been great to really share, updates that are coming. So the fiscal year is ending, but it's March. Why do I care about it if it's in June? And what do contract admins need to know about their contracts? Because some people have 20, some people have 1. It really is a wide range of what people are responsible for. And we also have this contract process map, which is really nice to walk people through when they're developing and creating a contract of what their steps are and who's responsible for what. So since we're throwing all these new pieces of information at people, we wanted to support them. So performance monitoring matters. It helps to identify improvement. It shows what activities are done with the money spent. And since it's such a big part of the contracts, we wanted to have a toolkit for it. So it helps to show, how to develop a monitoring plan, shows what matters. So what activities are done and which ones, when they're not done, really impacts that outcome. How do we create metrics to monitor that? What are benchmarks and why does that matter? And then we have templates to help people actually work through and put in their contracts now. One thing we're actually currently working on is a budget tool. And so that's going to help. So if people have contracts that spend the same throughout the year versus varies, month to month, they know like, oh, in June, I expect a lot of funding to go out. If it's not invoiced, I can follow up and see like, are we going to have underspend this year? And what do I need to do for that? But I think one of the coolest things that we've actually created is this online dashboard. It has everything with it. I come from another state agency. We did not have this. It's very, different and really helpful. It has a dashboard that shows people's contracts, are they coming up for renewal? What time do they need to start doing work on them? When their contracts are in the development system, where are they at in that system? Are they getting signed? Are they out for signature? Are they already signed and we're ready to go? It has another system in there that providers can report their spending on, which then the contract administrators can match on their reported activities and can see if those match up. We even have a risk piece in there. So when our financial partners are able to look at the audits and do a risk score, contract administrators also can see like, are they a low risk? Are they a high risk? And like a little bit of why they are. All right, we got the tools done. We can now like start to actually create that dream job of actually doing evaluation and start to change this culture. And so while we have these newsletters and webinars we've been doing for a while, we know we can improve. So while we like evaluation for improvement, it's not just for outside of our area. We know we can also do better. And so for newsletters, we're looking at success stories, case studies, planning to do one actually on how maybe a state has funding coming through and it's only getting monitored once a year. And why does that matter? And why is maybe that not a great idea? And so balancing though, not doing a gotcha culture, knowing that we really want this to be a culture of learning and improving without calling anyone out. And so then webinars too, we're starting to improve. Instead of just doing updates of what's going on, doing more trainings. So I actually did a training on why we do performance monitoring, able to use the connects in the back to really pull that in, that why monitoring really matters, why it goes towards improvements. So this is where we're able to really start to share how our contracts help in program evaluation. Maybe they're identifying areas of improvement for our program, or they're gathering that data we need in order to go to program effectiveness. In a previous job, I was a communications specialist, so I was able to pull from that experience, develop message maps and taglines for our program, help staff who are working on these communications share that they don't just do contract administration. We don't just monitor simply for a checklist. But it's to serve the public, because what good is it if our contracts aren't useful, if they're not related to the programs and the outcomes we want? So since our contracts are our programs, they're how we serve our public. It's how we help to improve the lives of children and family. And so with the goal of improvement in mind, we can really focus in on these contracts on this detail, because we all know monitoring just to monitor won't get us anywhere. That checklist mentality sticks you in that status quo, and we know the status quo can be better because we know there's still children in the welfare system, custodial parents not receiving child support, and people in need of jobs. My goal in every job I have is to work myself out of a job. And so if we're doing things right, we don't have a job, but we do. So our contracts matter because our programs matter, and that's how we do our programs. So part of this connection to monitoring to improvement is part of this culture change. We're tying in the logic models of the program and pulling out, here's how your contract fits into it, and let's connect it. And after you connect it, we can evaluate and we can improve. And yes, it's a dream job. So we got it. So I'm doing this connection. I can't monitor or evaluate the whole welfare system. But one example I want to call out that I've been working on is with this Brighter Futures initiative. So it does Brighter Futures for Children. This program has funding from several sources and contracts with even more people. They need a performance monitoring plan for each of these contracts, and they need a report on specific outcomes set by the state legislator. But they don't have performance monitoring plans in place. We realized this last time. They do have annual reports. They're gathering information. Maybe it's not the best quality, but it's a starting point. So it's kind of a flag that I could just say, hey, you need to do this. It's required. We got audited. You don't want to know money. This is bad. Audits. Doesn't get to improvements. It doesn't help to connect that why behind the plan and the report. So instead, I'm actually currently working with the contract administrator to map their work to the bigger picture, taking what they have, which is about 10 different contracts from 5 different funding sources, and identifying how their contracts are doing to tie into that bigger program, which is focused on increasing the well-being outcomes of children and youth in Wisconsin. So with this current mapping process, the biggest win for me is the contract administrator is excited. Realizing that monitoring the contract is just as important as their contract work. And so if we can build this excitement from the ground up, we'll be able to have contract admins see their contracts as their programs in action. You're muted.
Which is just great that Disa is able to help make that culture shift at that contract administrator level, and really we're seeing the fruits of that labor. But also really exciting is that our goal is to start again making that connection at the contract administrator level, and now we're moving towards a team level and moving up through our division and hopefully our department. The quick wins of our contract administration program really has made us refocus other performance management efforts at that grassroots level. We're focusing on working, like I said, with other smaller teams across the organization, really to talk through how they measure success, how they think critically about their inputs, their activities, outputs, outcomes, the work that they do, and really then developing indicators to measure their progress. So although we're starting with contract administration, we're really using this as a launching pad to carry the conversation into other areas of the department. So we hope over the next year or so to expand our grassroots work, and really jumping into working at our supervisor, our manager, in director level. So ultimately, for me, this journey has made me step back and taught me that we really need to connect the dots. I need to connect those dots between the contract administration program, this other project, but also how do we make it relevant to the work that's happening at the highest level of our department. It may not be that executive level kid stat, but I can tell you, folks are paying attention. They're paying attention to the excitement at like I said, that grassroots level. And as it starts to filter up, we're feeling the support. And so I feel like almost every month I'm being invited to talk at a executive leadership level about the progress that we're making in the contract administration program. And if we can go to the next slide, what I tell them is what I'm telling our contract administrators, and I tell them, yes, it's your job. It's your job, leaders. It's your job, contract administrators, but also it's our job too. Disa's mentioned that we have an amazing contract team made up of our fiscal and our budget partners. And so, yes, it's your job, but really it's a team effort to, as we've said, improve the lives of kids and families. So that's our journey. Disa, is there anything else that you have to add?
I don't think so.
Are there any questions from the audience?
I see one question on how do you handle learning fatigues with all the changes?
Right. Right. And I think in the middle of COVID, it's a real thing. And it's probably been a bigger challenge to overcome. What I will say is the fact that this work was happening before without the infrastructure around it has actually really helped us, because what I found is that our contract administrators want more. So it's not that we are telling them that they need to do things differently. We are actually giving them guidance that they hadn't had before. So it's tiring. We had some people push back on, like, I can't do another training. I don't understand. And we said, take your time. That's why we built it in these snapshots. We've been at it for a long time, and it was also just kind of slow rolling into, hey, we want you to have this done by December. We understand if it takes till February, and being patient ourselves, right? That we hadn't had a solid contract administration program since the inception of the department. And so if it takes folks a little bit longer to get there, that's okay. But ultimately, folks are going to be happy that you're providing the infrastructure and they can finally make that connection back to their programs. And I think that's what really made folks excited as well, is that it didn't feel like an administrative burden or something financially they didn't understand. It really was tying back to why they got into their job, and for them it is to help kids and families within their programs.